really a whale breaching is probably the single most powerful burst maneuver in nature, the biggest creatures on Earth. And to propel themselves out of the water into the air where they don't belong, that's so expensive calorically.
Welcome to Water People, a podcast about the aquatic experiences that shape who we become back on land. I'm your host, Lauren Hill, joined by my partner, Dave Rastovich. Here we get to talk story with some of the most interesting and adept waterfolk on the planet. We acknowledge the Bundjalung Nation, the traditional custodians of the land and waters where we work and play, who have cared for this sea country for tens of thousands of years. Respect and gratitude to all First Nations people, including elders past, present, and emerging. This season is supported by Patagonia, whose purpose-driven mission is to use business to save our home planet. Today, we're in conversation with author Bonnie Tsui. Bonnie was born in Queens, New York, and raised on Long Island. As her parents met in a swimming pool in Hong Kong, it seemed fitting that she and her brother should then prepare for competitive swimming careers, which lasted about a decade. Bonnie attended Harvard University, where she rowed crew, snowboarded, and studied American literature. She came to surfing in her late 20s after relocating to California. Today, Bonnie lives, swims, and surfs in the Bay Area and contributes regularly to the New York Times, among other publications. She's the author of 4 books: American Chinatown, A People's History of 5 Neighborhoods, Why We Swim, a children's book called Sarah and the Big Wave, and her latest, On Muscle, the stuff that moves us and why it matters.
And what a treat to be able to sit with Bonnie, someone who has such a great, curious mind, but also a real skill with her hand. You know, the pen in her hand is incredible. And that's something that we really have to be thankful for with surfing, because a lot of us feel and show so much through film and photography, art. And then when it comes to the written word, it's a hard line to dance when it comes to talking about the ocean and surfing and swimming and all that. Though where we came across Bonnie's work was originally with Why We Swim, and that was a book that dove right into the feeling in your body when you swim, what's physically happening when we immerse ourselves in the water. And that really struck a chord with me because I spent a lot of time as a kid in the swimming pool, in the ocean. And then I also have a mum right now who's, late 60s and is a full water baby, and it's keeping her young and vibrant of spirit. And she's a part of that big culture in Australia of beach swimming every morning and surfing and all of that. So that was a real treat to find someone like Bonnie who can speak of such things so well. And then also that she's a head over heels surf rat like we are. And I really appreciated her ability with that book, but also with her recent book On Muscle, speaking about the wonders of feeling strong and how that sits in our modern culture, how it used to sit before industrialization perhaps, where men and women were, doing feats of strength in traditional cultures, and how recent times strong women haven't been as supported as strong men. And that's just an interesting area to look into. And I know for you, Lauren, being a surfer at this point in your time as a water woman, feeling strong is a wonderful feeling for you and kind of new, wouldn't you say?
I think it's a new focus for me. I feel like I grew up in a culture where so much of feminine beauty was really defined in terms of smallness and not taking up much space and having as small a body as possible. And that is very incongruent with having a strong body for most people. And so as I've gotten older and as I've gone through pregnancy and have felt not great at times, I've really discovered working with an exercise physiologist, working with weights, challenging myself on land, and feeling the incredible benefits of that in the water. In paddle endurance, really feeling so much more fluid and natural than it ever has in my life. Bonnie's book, and also another book that we talk about in the chat, Born to Run, and actually another book as well, Natural Born Heroes, which is all about not the way that social media spins us health and well-being and physicality, which is in terms of aesthetics, how we look. Do our muscles fit into a certain cookie cutter mold of whatever musculature is in vogue at the time, whether it's a big booty or big calves or big strong shoulders, whatever it happens to be. The fads are always changing, but this is flipping that conversation to one that's about how can we think about strength in terms of usefulness, in terms of being of service to our families, our communities, and the world. I had so many questions lined up for Bonnie, and I didn't get to ask quite a few. One, and I recommend you pick up her book on muscle to read about this further, but she writes about the way that we forget how much men's sports are entwined with the histories that we tell. And she writes about the mythologizing of sport that happens on the men's side of things. We tell our stories about the Jerry Lopez's, the Wayne Lynch's, all of the great fathers of surf culture. And there's virtually no female equivalent. We don't have that same sense of grandeur and mythologizing for the women's side of sport. And that's a real deficit that I felt growing up, and I want to be part of changing. But we can look back and see there's a real imbalance there. And it's a real disservice to modern surf cultures to not be able to have those anchors and touchstones to connect our lineages to.
Totally. Well said. I love you for that. I love your brain when it goes in those intricate ways. And that makes me think of our chat with Mary Setterholm. If people want to dive back into that previous episode, that was incredible for speaking with someone who was on the ground through the decades in surfing, a woman. And this chat, again, this is just such a privilege to be able to sit with someone who's sat with so many people. A writer like her, it's so great when we get this opportunity, like a James Nestor. We got to sit with him and you realize, oh, this person is like a meeting point. They're like the center of the hourglass, and we come up and meet them in the middle, and they come to us and bring down all this information they've gleaned from so many other people. And I love that about this conversation.
We always begin in the same place by asking our guests about a time or experience after which you were never the same. Would you be willing to share a moment like that with us today?
Absolutely. When I was thinking about what experience to share, I kept going back to this signal moment from childhood, and it was growing up at Jones Beach in New York, going there with my family and just standing in the shallows, kind of with my brother and my cousins, kind of like waiting for a wave to come in where we all like jumped up and got caught. And then it was like this, whoa, like breathing with the ocean, right? With our bodies kind of. And it's something that I write about in the beginning of Why We Swim. And I think the reason for that is it was so much the beginning of my relationship with the ocean, but also a particular day comes to mind when I got hit by a wave from behind. And so I kind of went ass over tea kettle, totally upside down, not actually knowing which way was up. And it was this weird moment, I think, because I was young enough to not be immediately frightened that I could be in danger, I could drown. But it was also kind of like, I can't find my way back up. And to be in this like suspended state of animation where it was just sort of like green light and not knowing, no directionality whatsoever. And then starting to feel a little bit like, okay, so now what? It was like this, it's something that has stayed with me my entire life. I am a grown up with 2 children of my own. And I remember when I was teaching my kids how to swim and kind of be familiar with, and also, of course, safe and respectful of the ocean, like, because all of us, like all of us, kids are so magnetized to the ocean. And so watching them, I just couldn't help but remember this feeling. And then also kind of like coming up, gasping for air, and like my hair wrapped around my face. And actually my first impulse was not to be scared. It was embarrassment. It was like, did anyone see that I was like almost drowning, or in danger, or not in control, I guess. Or yeah, it was very, it's kind of funny to kind of probe at that, because we wanted so badly to be in that water all together, because it was the source of all this goodness and fun and pleasure. And I didn't want to be taken out of it. I didn't want my mom to see me, or one of my cousins or my brother to say like, oh, Bonnie almost drowned, and so now she shouldn't be in there. You know what I mean? And it was like almost like a fear of having it taken away from me. But then, of course, as an adult, I look back on this, and I think that this was actually probably the first moment of really understanding what it is to respect that place.
Wow. That's so classic. There's so many little nuances in that story. It just, makes me wonder, have you had any of those moments with your children where you've seen them interact with the water and maybe have some of those feelings as well?
Oh, definitely. And I actually think about it as we're watching them and they're completely unaware. They're oblivious to that, that there is a wave coming and it's gonna knock them over. And there's this like shock. And it's almost like betrayal. You see it in the wide-eyed face, the look, right? They're just like, what the? And how could that happen? And then there's like shock, and then there's fear, and then the fear and the tears come, right? But I think at first it is a little bit of a shock. Like, wait, we were having fun.
Totally.
I've read that you've written, Bonnie, about, quote, the complex and terrible beauty of a relationship with the ocean. I feel like that experience is maybe the seed of understanding the complexity.
Probably. I think that's a good read on the situation, Lauren. Thank you.
I love it.
And how has that complexity played out over the course of your life? You're someone who has gone back to the water time and again. You've written about and spoken about the water being the place where, as a family, as a child, you all felt most whole together. And so already we can see how the ocean for you has been this deeply connective experience with your family, a place to connect, and then it's this place of potentially embarrassment, humiliation, fear, surprise, and now
it all. It's vast enough to contain all of the experiences and the emotions. I mean, truly, I want to nod to what we had just talked a little bit just before starting this podcast of how it does hold all of life, right? It does hold all of the joy and the pain, and it's big enough to absorb all the things, all the feelings, all the experiences. And it is no wonder that we turn to it as a source of comfort in those times. And I write about that a lot because in writing about our human relationship with the water, I think you can't help but write about all of life that is contained within that, and also with the ocean being such a vast part of our planet, and it's just like it all is connected, in this way. And so I think the way my work has been informed by that feeling that the ocean can hold all of those things, and also is a way for us to find community and connection and to value it and to point to all of these ways in which it does take care of us,
Yeah.
I'm wondering about your community there where you live, Bonnie, and you have a lot of people around you. There's all walks of life. When you go to the water, and I'm sure it's similar for us when we go to the water, it's like a personal experience, surfing, swimming, whatever it is we do when we go down to the beach. But it also is a shared experience, and one that's so wonderful to have time in the water with friends. How do you navigate that where you are and at this point in your life? Like, do you bring people into your moments like this morning when you went surfing? Are you someone who needs to call friends and organize like a social type of surfing moment? Or is it, largely a personal one-on-one type of relationship you have with the water these days?
I love that question. I go to many of the same spots and often at the same time. And so, the fact that I was at the water's edge at 5:15 this morning.
Oh yeah, you're a regular,
right? At civil twilight, meeting and I do have very good, close, regular surf crew, right? But it's also not necessary that we do tell each other we're going, because for the most part, they will be there. And even if we don't, I think we all, there are a couple of people who I often do check in with because it's just our habit and we are good friends in many other arenas. But even if they can't be there at that time, I still go because I still need to be there. And I also know that I will see familiar and beloved faces in the water, And if they're not there, the human ones, I know I'll see like a seal or something. You know what I mean? It's okay. And then I always talk about and think about the light in the morning. And this morning was especially stunning because it was like a little bit of like cloud on the horizon. And so you get that sideways light And so it's kind of like liquid mercury, and then it kind of the sun gets higher, and then there's the golden layer on top of that. And I always talk about it, and people must be tired of me saying, "Look at that light," because it's just you have to remark on it. Wow.
Yes, you do.
You do, yeah.
You really do.
Not
I
tired
love
of it.
seeing your faces nodding up.
Oh, 100%. I have an elder who, when I was a young fella, he was always encouraging me to acknowledge the light and the clouds and the colors and the light bouncing off the water and how it
Yes.
changes when there's a different texture on the water. And
Yes,
how
yes.
we're on the East Coast, so he'd always say, look at the double sun, in the morning when you're surfing, there's two suns. And so I'm hearing you loud and clear. And it's just really, I find it really interesting to speak with people who live in different parts of the world, but are obviously coastal people, and just know, that there's so many things we share in common. And, you saying that you'll go to the beach and you don't need to organise with certain people because they'll be there because the wind is offshore and there's a nice type of swell.
And it's a good tide.
Yeah.
It's a good tide. It's
these
it's like
things.
mid and rising. Yeah.
And also, if they're in trouble, if someone's like having a hard time and they're not there, I need to
check
reach
in.
out. Exactly. And that's a wonderful thing.
No, I love, I'm getting goosebumps kind of thinking about this and hearing you talk about this, because it is so much of the rhythms of place that tell us about how everyone's doing that it's not spoken necessarily. The absence can tell you a lot. I think that's a really beautiful observation. Oh, and I know that you'll both appreciate this. My friend Sue and I this morning, we were talking about how there was actually a pretty strong offshore, like gusting. There would be periodic gusts, and then it would die, and then it would be glass. But even when there was a little bit of chop, we were looking at the water and said, it's actually like chopped up glass, which is not the same as when it's sort of churned up and you can't really see anything where it's cloudy. It was clear, but the quality of the wind was that it was like, she said chopped up glass, and I loved that. And we just kept saying chopped up glass to each other in the parking lot afterwards.
That's very cool. I've never heard that for a texture. That's another one to put in.
Oh yeah, take that with you out there. See if you can make that
See if we
go.
can find it.
Yeah, that's great.
Bonnie, in your book, Why We Swim, you explore one way of being in the water, swimming, and what that's meant for you both personally and to us as a species. You lay out that relationship in 5 thematic themes: survival, well-being, community, competition, and flow. Maybe with the exception of survival, it felt like those themes could also really easily describe what draws so many of us to surfing. What drew you to wave riding in your late 20s?
That's a great question. I moved from New York to San Francisco. My husband and I, at the time, we were not yet married, but we were, living the life of 20-year-olds in New York. And I was writing and I was working at magazines, and I thought I would always and forever live there, to be honest, because that was sort of like the center of publishing and writing and all that stuff. There came a time in which we could move somewhere. So my husband was coming back from a year studying abroad, getting his master's, and he does environmental science and public policy, and he does oceans and climate work, and has been doing that for the last 25 years. And he had said, he grew up in a tiny town in Massachusetts, and he really did not love living in New York. Whereas I thought, okay, when you come back from Oxford, we'll just move into a different place, And he was just sort of like, what about California? And I was very resistant to this, but we also had tons of friends, in New York and in California, and specifically in the Bay Area. And when we came out, I didn't fall in love with it right away. And I was kind of trying to figure out who I was here. I kept swimming, but I had never really been that interested as a kid in surfing. Like, I would watch people surf, but I loved going in and swimming around like my dad would. And then I had a sort of, critical mass of friends who had taken up surfing and specifically, cold water surfing here in San Francisco. And they were just sort of like, you should come out with us. And I had just like messed around like on work trips in places where it was easy to rent a board and, have someone show me the ropes and teach me. And I enjoyed it, but it wasn't something that I could see that I was building into my life here, especially because it was so cold. Because the Pacific here just stays cold, and even now it's June 5th. It's summer here, and yet we are all still wearing, at least a 5'4" wetsuit. And to be comfortable, to be out there for a while, like not just like I could get away with wearing less, but then I get cold. And why would I do that? Why would I want to get out? Because I was cold, right? Anyway, so this is the long way of saying that I took up surfing and then fell in love with it. And I think that helped me fall in love with California. I really do, because it was a way of being here that I was not in New York, And I think I was ready for something new. And it's something that has now like been just such a gift to keep trying and failing and trying and failing and trying and getting better, but also understanding that this is a lifetime thing that I get to have now, that I will always be learning. There's so many variables. I would love to have picked this up as a child so that it would feel maybe more easeful, in a lot of ways. But I also appreciate it so much more because I did not come to it until later in life. I don't know. It's interesting because I would love to know how you look at this, like, because you are both children of the sea.
Hopefully forever.
For me, I really like looking at people who are further along the path than ourselves. And so around here we have one of our neighbours is in his mid-80s, George Greeno. So he lives just through the bush away from us here. And he goes to the beach every morning and he's pretty much surfing every day at 9 o'clock on a surf mat. He's growing his food. He's designing fins and surfboards and boats still. And one of his sort of buddies when they were younger, especially Bob McTavish, is in his early 80s. He's a master craftsman surfboard builder. He is also at the beach every day. He's also waking up with curiosity and has a vibrance and a real sparkle in his eye. Albie Falzon is down the coast. These are people for me with my story. They're all men, but Lauren's got some great women that she really looks up to too. But
not a lot of elders though.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that in a little bit. But
well, what I see with all those characters is really a fountain of youth. Like, it's not conceptual. It's not an idea. It's legitimately happening. You look at these guys and, they've pretty much got barnacles growing on their disgusting looking feet.
Yeah, I want to say
they're
not
barefooted.
Not an external fountain of youth.
No. They're shredded.
But
Their
inside.
skin's falling off their face. They're so shredded. Their eyeballs, their eyes have got gnarly to cataracts and pterygiums and stuff. But their spirit is exactly the same. They're so vibrant and it never ends. And so also that thing of how you do it is never ending. So regardless of when you started, like, these are people who have surfed since they were tiny kids as well. And they're in their 80s and they still have so many questions and have so much interest. And so it's just wonderful. To me, that's proof that you're right. It doesn't end. It's a never ending experience.
We have a favorite in the lineup, David, and we call him the Forever Grom.
Oh,
because
awesome.
he's just, oh my gosh, I think was it last year? He was turning 58 or 59, and he was like, I'm going to surf 59 waves on my birthday. And then
Nice.
he ended up staying for another 10 more because he couldn't get enough and was just like working his way up and down the beach, like just having fun, high five everyone. It was just so great. And I see him really as like a perpetual kid in like the best way. Yeah.
We have a similar character here, not this Dave, but another Dave, and his nickname is Dolphin Dave. And he's always out. He's always in the car park in his budgie smugglers, like in his Speedo, just soaking up the sun, like spreading the best vibes, so stoked no matter what the surf is like, off to get his organic smoothie after he's such a legend.
It's great.
What came up for me, Bonnie, with your sort of bounce back of that question is thinking about a couple of my friends who have taken up surfing later in life, in their late 30s, early 40s. And I just have so much respect and awe for them. It has made me think about beginners in the lineup so much differently. Seeing these adult women who very easily could just play the games that they're good at, but instead they're in the water learning this new language that is incredibly intricate, a forever experience. Like you said, one of my friends, Elle, she just sent me a video. She went to the wave pool in Melbourne to get some lessons on, and I feel like that's like the perfect use for a wave pool, to just practice a pop-up. Yeah, exactly. Practice the pop-up. And it was like 8 degrees. She was freezing in booties, but so committed to learning this surfing thing at 39. And I just feel like that's super inspiring.
If you really come by it honestly, right? If you really are super excited and curious about a thing and that gives you life, I mean, what else gives you life? Like that is the energy that keeps you going, and all of this, like, curiosity and enthusiasm and just wonder, like to be open to that always is. And I think that's really important for me as a journalist too, right? As a writer, that when I love to hear stories and I love to chase the stories, because when people tell me things, I feel alive. I feel alive in then trying to figure out how to share that experience, to write about that experience in a way that feels true, and also communicate some of that sensory pleasure and joy and the character of the person who I have been so privileged to spend time with.
I so feel that too. I totally feel that too. I'm curious, Bonnie, about what your experience was like moving from being primarily in the water to, as a swimmer, to moving to being on top of the water. Was there anything that surprised you about that shift in perspective?
It's a little weird. It's definitely a little weird. I haven't thought about this for a while, but when you're underwater, your senses are muted. There's a liberation there, right? Because you're taken out of your normal, quite literally taken out of your normal medium. So I think when I go swimming, it's a really nice way to be meditative. There was a time in which swimming did give me also like a little bit more of the adrenaline with more open water swimming or with competition, which is something that I kind of went back to in the writing of Why We Swim, because I wanted to know what it was like to compete again as a grown up. And like I swam for 10 years club swimming as a kid and competed, and that was swim team was such a huge part of my life then and very formative. And I kind of wanted to see, and this was when my own kids, my oldest at that time was 6 and had just joined a swim team. And I was joining the swim team at the same time he was joining a swim team for the first time. And I thought, this is so, like, we were echoes of each other. It was like pretty profound actually to have that. But I think now, because surfing has happily, wonderfully been a focus in recent years, that I get so much pleasure and that kind of attentiveness. Like I have to be very aware and thoughtful in a way that when I'm swimming, let's say in a pool, I'll just go to the neighborhood pool, and just swim for an hour. And I appreciate that just for like this like perfect circumscribed known thing where I just kind of go into a rhythm. And once I go into the rhythm, then my mind just kind of like goes for a swim on its own, really, because I'm on autopilot. And I appreciate that, because I appreciate that untethering, because when I'm in the ocean, I am really hyper aware, not in a bad way. I mean, I think I'm just attuned, to all the things, and there's so much sensory input, and I want to kind of take it all in. And that's like extreme presentness, I think.
Yeah. So then have you taken to body surfing as a nice medium in the middle there?
No, I haven't. Should I? I guess you can sell me on that.
Oh, yes. I can't wait. I just really look forward to your writing about this, because
okay.
The experience of body surfing, especially in wetsuits. So when you just get streamlined, and the extra buoyancy of a good thick wetsuit. So where you are there, and you find perhaps at the northern end of Ocean Beach, or somewhere where there's a good outward current ripping back out to sea. So there's, that water's rushing out, and the waves are quite stationary. They don't run off too quick. They have water coming back out through them. So when you catch them as a swimmer, because you can't like accelerate as much as you can on a surfboard when you're just body surfing, you kind of need waves that are either slow moving or semi-stationary like that with a reverse rip in them. And I would be so curious to read what you would have to say about that world, because it's kind of the blend of these two ways that you're talking about. And I think in a lot of places around the world, people as they get older take to body surfing much like when they were children. As you know, and I'm in that phase right now. I've got a sore back and my body's a bit sore, and all I want to do is body surf because it feels the best on my body.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
can still ride waves. I'm looking forward to that. I hope you do that.
I think that basically means I have to come visit you both and you can teach me how to do that.
That sounds
It's a
great.
research
In.
trip. Research
Yep.
trip.
That's great.
Bonnie, we've been sitting with your beautiful new book on muscle,
Yay.
the stuff that moves us and why it matters. And it made me reflect on my surfing life. I started when I was about 14, and I remember as a teenager, I'd been a gymnast, so I kind of had an awareness of my body and of power in my body, but there was something about paddling, about propelling myself and feeling my muscles working together, the bodily harmony of it, moving through water, that made me feel whole and powerful in a way that I'd never really experienced before. And that's continued to be a really important touchstone of kind of like literal embodied empowerment in my life that I never really talk about, but your book made me reflect on. Is that something that you've felt in your surfing practice, that sort of muscular harmony?
Absolutely. I love hearing about you being a gymnast first and then making the transition to surfing and how that felt bodily to you so different, because they are really different experiences of your body, right? One is you're so connected to the earth, right? Even if you're flying, gravity brings you back down in a pretty intense in your face way, right?
Yes.
And so you have to, it's so much about muscular control. And that is not to say that surfing is not that too, because it absolutely is. But when you're surfing, you are moving with the water. The whole point is to be in harmony with the water, right? And what you were saying about paddling made me think of paddling, learning really to swim powerfully, which is to say you need to work with the water, because when you don't, everyone knows what that feels like, right? It's like this awkward fight and it just feels bad. And it actually reminds me of what the adaptive yoga teacher, Matthew Sanford, said in an interview that I did with him for On Muscle, because I asked him what yoga felt like when he was practicing it well, right? And he said, it feels like the difference between a good hug and a bad hug, because a bad hug, everyone knows what that is. And that's what I think of when I think about like when you're missing the rhythm of paddling, when if you're off, it feels bad, right? It feels just like you're fighting. And yet when you have that glide, you are integrated, right? And so he was saying with a good hug with someone, it feels great because your body is integrated with someone else's. And I just love that metaphor because I think it works. Like everyone knows what it is when they feel it. So it's one of those things that I love the analogy, because it connects to everyone in a way that can make sense to them, because everyone's had that experience.
What does strength mean, Bonnie, and why do we tend to value it? Why do we value it culturally?
I think, from a very basic elemental level, evolutionarily it proved fitness, right? Like that you were able to survive, right? You're able to get food and live and physically fend off predators and all that. I mean, that's like from a very basic, I don't think that that's actually that interesting because we don't do that. I think it's good to understand the basic reasoning for it, because that does explain a lot of things when you look at society today, right? To trace it back, because across human history, across different societies and cultures, that strength was valued because it was a way to demonstrate fitness of all kinds, right? Fitness to be a leader in a group, or to, have a mate and reproduce. And again, like this is like basic stuff, but you can kind of see the progression through society and then to today where, despite our increasingly virtual lives, that strength now, like seeing someone physically do something extraordinary is still something that we have such awe and joy and like kind of instinctive we are instinctively impressed by someone like picking up a strong thing or swimming 100 miles or what, just like that or that they are showing us something that is beyond their body. It's about their character. It's a signal about strength of character as well. And I think that that's what was so interesting about writing this book about muscle, is that muscle as a tangible thing has such fascinating and outsized influence on how we think about ourselves as people. That the qualities of muscle that we admire are a kind of shorthand for character. And in the book I talk about this, like we tell ourselves to be strong, like what does strength mean to you? Or to show good form or perfect form, or to be a person of action, right? To be flexible, to muscle through hard things, to show grit. Like these are all things that, you're nodding because you're like, yes, those are things that we admire. Like these are things that we are generally good to, like when we attribute these characteristics to someone, and yet they are things we hold bodily. They're descriptions of the tangible thing that is muscle. And I found that so fascinating because even when we are not being the people of action, we are telling other people to relax, like to like relax your muscle. I mean, it is so fabulous because like our language betrays our thoughts and ideas and our concepts of personhood, even though we may not realize that muscle can mean all of these different things. And we all have them, and we don't think of them necessarily something that we all get to have. Like we don't all own strength in the same way, and I think certainly as women, we don't get to do that.
I really liked at the start of the book where you say that about, this history of women not being celebrated for that like overt displays of strength in recent history. And I liked how in the book you go back to, the picking up of stones in Scotland and all these other places where there are these traditions that would have been both male and female participants and everything. And I'd just like to know, what your thoughts on that are now when we see, especially through the surfing lens, when we see so many young girls surfing now and, that balance in the surfing organism within the next few years is going to be like a 50-50 split of men and women, young boys and young girls in surfing, which when I was a kid, it was way, way off that. Right. It was mostly just boys surfing, and the occasional girl, like Lauren, you were one of maybe Leah and a couple of the girls were around when you were a kid.
Two surfers in my town who were like really taken by it.
Yeah, and that's not like that anymore. Like that is changing. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, there's just so many, and not even just women and girls surfing. Certainly the competition has been elevated, and there's a style now also that like, female surfers are surfing so powerfully. There's just a larger range of styles, right? And a larger range of like athleticism. Like I'm sure you could talk about this so till the end of time. It's sort of like how, what was considered good surfing, beautiful surfing, stylish surfing, across shortboarding or longboarding. Like, of course, there's different ways and different values attached to like different bodies that do certain things, movements, grace, but sort of like speed, power, flow, the whole thing. It's like it's being revolutionized in a way in the surfing world with more women and girls doing all these incredible feats of physicality, I think. And so that we see this, that we get to see it. And I'm not just talking about like girls getting to see it. It means something to be able to imagine yourself doing something, right? And if you never see someone you can imagine being, then it's harder, right? But I also think that it is so important for boys, obviously, men, obviously, to see that that is possible and also allowed. I mean, I put that in air quotes because this is the language that has been used to police parameters of like who is allowed to do what in society since time immemorial. And so I think, I love to see that. And I love to see that there is more of a range of experience that seems possible for for women in sports.
This isn't just in surfing, though, either, is it really? Because if you look at other sports and you say tennis, for example, and you look at the body types, the physiques in women's tennis now compared to 30 years ago, it is radically different, and acceptable body styles, and well, not acceptable, but celebrated techniques and strengths in sports like tennis. It's interesting to me.
I really appreciated how you wrote about specifically female strength, how it's been deemed unnatural and uncanny, and the notion of it, you write, is tied to a crazed or highly emotional state of excitement. Later in the book, you use the example of our culture's focus on testosterone and not estrogen as an example of the kind of cultural editing we make in our storytelling around strength and sport. How did we come to think of testosterone as the strength hormone? Is it true? And what does it say about us that we focus on testosterone?
That's a big question, Lauren. We might need a whole season devoted to this. I mean, I think, certainly testosterone is so associated with masculinity and with muscles that come with male puberty, right? So I think that we associate that with muscles, and certainly testosterone is really important to muscle growth and health and all that. But the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that estrogen is also super important to muscle health and metabolism and all of that. And so you need both. And all of us humans need both hormones to be supporting our muscular health and our healthy aging into later life. And so I think that was one thing that I really loved kind of unpacking and like peeling back those layers and trying to tease out where the prejudices are and where those come from, and then also saying, well, actually, it's fun to do that. It's fun to kind of look at where all these ideas come from, and I think certainly the kind of I think what I have really observed over the last few years of just even writing this book is that all movement and muscle, right, is valuable, whatever kind of activity, swimming, surfing, running, dancing that you do, but the critical mass of the scholarship that's sort of gathering behind the importance of strength training and conditioning, right? So we're talking about also bodies, professional athletes, just like obviously strength and conditioning has been such a huge component for every sport, like we said. Hence, we know that lifting and strength training for athletes of every sport is super important to supporting whatever it is that they're doing in their sports. And that includes surfers. And I know surfers have been really late to the game. I talked to, Kevin Dean, who is the medical director for USA Surfing for the Tokyo Olympics. And he was so funny because he said, surfing is so behind. His practice has been working with professional athletes and recreational athletes of all kinds. But he talked about how, the NFL is for example, like football, American football it's so drilled in to do all of these different things to like support all around health and strength on the field, like, and the NBA similarly, basketball, right? So it's like you're doing all these other things to support spending all this time weightlifting and recovery and all this stuff. And then surfing is only kind of starting to like kind of come into like, oh, you need to do all those things too to support like surfing and a healthy body. And I think just culturally, he was kind of observing that there are these leaps and bounds that have finally come to surfing, because surfing is a sport that is, it is funny to kind of see it be regimented, I guess, for lack of a better word, like has not culturally lent itself to that kind of discipline, right? I don't know if you could probably talk about that a lot more with a lot more depth and nuance, but he was just sort of like, saying broadly, like a lot of surfers don't think that they need to do those things.
Yeah.
You have strong feelings about that. I have strong feelings about that, and they're very different.
Yeah. Well, funnily for me, I just immediately think of someone who does heaps of types of training and is physically really adept. Like they have heaps of coordination. They're fast twitch fibers are going. They're just on point. And then they get to the ocean and you see people like this and they jump on a board and they can barely paddle. They can't anticipate what a wave is going to do when the water bends here. It's going to make the water over there change in like 2-3 seconds time. They can't read that. So what's interesting to me is that we can have all of those physical abilities, capabilities, but then you get in the water and so many of them don't translate. And I just recall
Yes.
being a kid growing up in life-saving movements. So I was doing heaps of running, heaps of swimming, heaps of paddling. All of that would go out the window a lot of the time when you'd go to the ocean and you would be dealing with waves and currents and reading water, dynamic water. And so I've always sort of loved the fact that surfing has been able to function and thrive without needing such big institutions of fitness and training, inherently at the center of it. And so I like that. I like that this guy's come along and gone, why are you guys still not doing all this other stuff? Because it's like, it's an option. Like, you don't have to do that stuff.
Let me
well.
clarify by saying that if you don't have any of that knowledge, you can't surf. That is absolutely the baseline. But the other things can support you if you are,
100%.
your body.
Totally.
Your body.
Especially as we age.
Yes.
Especially as we age.
That's really the larger point.
Yes,
If
but
you don't
no.
know any of that other stuff, you're screwed.
Maybe because you talk to George Greeno over the hill here and Bob McTavish, they're in their mid-80s and they're still doing it. I don't think either of them would have touched a dumbbell or a yoga mat in their entire life.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah. So there it is. You always have people who can keep powering on.
They're rare.
Yeah, they're rare.
They're rare.
Yeah.
Okay, Bonnie.
Yeah.
So
If their backs and shoulders don't hurt, I would love to hear about how that is possible.
If you've enjoyed listening to the conversation so far, consider also subscribing to Water People on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It'll help other people find the show. And if you're feeling inspired, leave us a review. We love hearing from you. And now a word from the folks who help make the podcast possible. Patagonia is in business to save our home planet. Founded by Yvonne Chenard in 1973, Patagonia is a surf and outdoor apparel company based in Ventura, California. As a certified B Corp and a founding member of 1% for the Planet, the company is recognized internationally for its product quality and environmental activism, as well as its contributions of nearly $230 million to environmental organizations. Its unique ownership structure reflects that the Earth is its only shareholder. Profits not reinvested back into the business are paid as dividends to protect the planet. Learn more at patagonia.com.au. Our ancestors drank natural water from streams, rivers, and waterfalls, but most of us don't have access to readily available natural drinking water anymore. Primal Water by Alkaway is an at-home water filter that mimics nature and is boosted with molecular hydrogen. It's a game changer. The team at Alkaway are on a mission to reduce harm caused by tap water and plastic bottled water. They're currently working to protect World Heritage listed Springbrook Falls, just up the road from us, which is under threat from water mining. Feel alive with Primal Water and support the work to protect precious places like Springbrook. Head to alkaway.com and use the code WATERPEOPLE, one word, for $100 off your purchase until June 30th or $50 off after June 30th, 2025. Primal Water by Alkaway. Training, working with weights has been such a game changer for me as I've gotten older, especially in my shoulders. Learning how to do chin-ups. Chin-ups have just been like massive change for me in my paddling strength and endurance. So with what you've learned writing this book, Bonnie, how do you think about taking care of and building muscle for training? Do you have any warm-ups that you go to regularly? Training in particular that informs your surfing?
It's so funny. I think that my warm-up is putting my wetsuit on. Because it's so hard to get into it. And I get pretty good movement, all around movement, getting into the wetsuit in the morning. So it's so funny because I do talk to my trainer at the gym about, and this is like fairly recent, right? So like in the writing of this book, I was sort of like, how do I support my functional movement and what I want to do for the rest of my life, which is to surf and swim and do it well and without pain and forever, And so it was so funny because I told him about how my left shoulder, I just was like so scared that I was going to have to get like a rotator cuff surgery at some point. Not because I knew that there was a tear, but it was always like after like a big surf or, a particularly long stretch of days in which I was like swimming and surfing a lot that I just like, it was so cranky. The movement is like felt stiff. And he said, you know what, let's start by strengthening some of those really small muscles, like the side muscles that you never really pay attention to. Because really is like when those larger ones start fatiguing, are all of the other muscles around your shoulder supporting? And like, are they able to come in and take that load so that you're not constantly like grinding? And I have to tell you that like it has completely revolutionized, my feeling about my body and like how well it feels after like a big like a big trip or something like that, a big surf trip or something, when we're surfing a lot more than even just like at home. And it's so great. And I also like, really thinking about technique too. Like I think you really have to be very mindful of the movements that you're doing. Again, like I love, Dave, how you said earlier, I love people who are further along the path. And I'm like, I'm further along the path than you two. And so from this distance, let me
All
tell
right.
you
Tell
that
us.
it just really does feel great. Like I feel really good. And so I think that has been very nice to
Yeah.
be like, oh yeah, I really did drink the Kool-Aid in writing this book about muscle and longevity, and not just about functionally doing all the things, but I think understanding why you have to do them, but in a way, I wanted to write a book that was not like a prescriptive, like you should do this or you should do that, but just telling stories. Again, like Why We Swim, where those stories tell the why. Those stories make you feel sensorially like, oh, I actually felt that before. This means something to me. And I could be inspired by someone who is doing these things and using their muscles to find purpose and to find, who they are in the world. And also to like, you can have an impact that's far and wide beyond who you are individually. I think that that's also something about what being a person of action is, and being, enduring things and hard things and showing grit.
Yeah, that makes me think of that great book, Born to Run, by Christopher
Yes,
McDougall. Yeah.
Christopher McDougall,
Yeah.
our buddy.
And his second one, that in particular, that I really liked, the Natural Born Heroes, and where he speaks of, people on the island of Crete running over the mountains and kidnapping a Nazi general and then carrying them over the mountains again and doing all these incredible things with their bodies that were really needed. Like they were in a time of crisis. And so being fit, capable, healthy was extremely useful for them at that point in time for survival. And I love to think of that we have, I'm sure America and Australia have similarities with gyms and 24-hour gyms and personal trainers and ice baths and breathing exercises and saunas, all this wave of fitness and well-being that's seems incredibly popular right now. I like to think that we're all doing that, hopefully, with that in mind, that we will be better citizens and community members, better family members, better able to look after each other when something happens, like a fire or a flood or whatever's going on. You're capable. Is that something you've encountered in your writing and in your many conversations with people? Because I feel like we have an opportunity here with you to sit with you, someone who has pursued questions and conversations with people, and just be so great to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, the people in this book are really so inspiring because of what they were capable of doing with their bodies that resonated way beyond, right? Like, it's not about making muscle to look good. It's about using, how do you use that, right? And so there's one really wonderful story. Ku Stevens, he shows up in the endurance section of the book, and he was just here in the Bay Area, as was Paige Bethman, who is a filmmaker who made an amazing documentary about him called Remaining Native. And that's on the festival circuit. Actually, is coming to the Sydney Film Festival
Oh, great.
next week. So I don't know if
Cool.
you're going to be down there, but you could see it. It's there's going to be the Australian premiere, but I'm going to back up and give a little bit of context, which is like, I asked myself, what does endurance mean, right? What does endurance mean to us as humans? And specifically with running, that we're built to move, we're built to, lift, climb, run, and as human beings and as social beings, we are also when we move together, that means something, right? There's a profound purpose to doing that. And so I was kind of talking about what does it mean now? Like, in the past, like with even with a long run, like you were just describing in Chris McDougall's book, there was a purpose for that, right? Like you were going to do something that needed to be done, and then that was something that was useful. And so what does it mean now, like across time? Like what it still means something to run. It still means something to run long distances. What is the purpose of that? Because it's how when we endure, when we suffer through something like that, we demonstrate care. It still is like, that's why we have like charity runs, marathons. We have a cause. It's a time in which there is attention on us, and we reflect back that attention by saying, this is my purpose. I am doing this for this reason. And we value that. We value that someone puts their skin in the game and that they use their body to demonstrate that care. And it's fascinating to kind of interrogate what that is and why is that, right? And then to then look at Ku Stevens, who is a runner. Now he's in college, but at the time he was in high school. He was a 17-year-old growing up on the Arrington Paiute Reservation in Nevada, tiny town. He was a cross-country team of one. He was the fastest high school runner in the state of Nevada his senior year in high school. And also, it was not just like that he was so gifted at running fast, I mean, since he was a kid, but that in his community, his great grandfather, when he was 8 years old, had escaped from an Indian boarding school that he had been taken to. Like, so a lot of children across North America, and I know this happened in Australia as well, where Indigenous children were taken from their homes and put into these white, often religious institutions to be educated and have the sort of Indigenous culture sort of taught out of them, right? And so his great grandfather, Frank Quinn, ran away at 8 years old, 50 miles across the Nevada desert to home. And he escaped, and they came back to get him, and then he escaped again, and he came back to get him. And then when he escaped the third time and ran home, they let him stay, and he lived out the rest of his days as a very respected tribal elder, was an alfalfa farmer, was someone who never spoke about his experiences at the boarding school because it was so terrible to be like torn away from your family. And it was like this, but it is a generational trauma that echoes, ripples. And so when Ku was 17, a lot of this news had come out in different boarding school sites across North America, including in Canada and Kamloops, where there were mass burials of children. A lot of children died at these places. And so, every time something like this happens, it's sort of like another another reopening of this wound that is like really stayed with and is repeated generationally with these families and communities all across the world, really, right? And so he said, how can I use my running? How do I use my legs to demonstrate care? Really, like, what can I do? And it's like, I'm going to run this run. I'm going to run the 50 miles that traces my great grandfather's path, from this boarding school home. And he did that. He ran, and he called it the Remembrance Run. And so it got a lot of attention, as you can imagine. And he's this high school kid, like he's got big dreams. He wants to run for University of Oregon, like, Nike Town. Like he just really wants to like be a great runner. And yet he also wants to demonstrate greatness and leadership and like show it's a learning experience. It's really such a generous act to invite people to learn more about what happened. He wanted to share the history. He wanted to, heal his community, but then it became bigger, right? And people would come from all over to join this run. And so he led it 3 times. I had the honor of running in the third run, because it was like his great grandfather ran 3 times. He was going to run 3 times. And it was just like, I really do lose the words to kind of explain what it was like to move as this collective body across the desert, because it was so beautiful. It was like, obviously it hurts. It's so hot. At the night and nighttime, it gets so cold, it's like it's relentless. Like your sweat evaporates the second that you give it out, and you're just looking for water, and you're just like, it's this profound experience that's very heightened. But to physically kind of follow along this path was something that, and it was also something that was inviting, because like it was every 5 miles there was a rest stop, and no one got left behind. You could run as many legs as you wanted to. You could also travel, with the support crews, and it was like an opportunity to share, and there were a lot of Native American runners who participated to kind of tell their own stories of like what had happened in their families. Their grandparents maybe had been taken and had to be at these Indian boarding schools, and so they never talked about their experiences. So it was an opportunity for them to be like, how do we share this? How do we heal these wounds? And how do we then make people understand what happens such that it never happens again? I mean, that's really what it is. And he was just like, this is not a protest. This is a remembrance. And it's an opportunity to share that. And I just felt like, what an incredible, like for a kid to be doing that, for a high school kid to be like, and his family is just wonderful. His parents are incredible, Misty and Delmar Stevens. And they really supported their son in making this happen and opening their family and their community and inviting anyone who wanted to learn more to participate for their own reasons to do that. And I think that is really, that's what it means to me, like to run with purpose. This was one really profound thing. And he's had just, an incredible influence, I think, since he's been doing this.
It's so wonderful. And I think of just how good we feel in our bodies and our spirits when we move and we use our bodies. So of course, if we do that together collectively, that's just going to enhance that experience and also deepen our relation to place too. I can't help but feel like when you were talking then, I was thinking of how when you were running and you're in this hot, dry climate, your senses are heightened, and the busyness in our minds, hopefully once we get into the groove, much like with swimming, once you get into that rhythm, the busyness of the mind quietens down, and the sense of where we are and all the subtle little things that are happening around us start to become obvious to us, like your shattered glass. No, it wasn't shattered glass. What was it? Choppy glass. Chopped glass.
Chopped glass. Yeah, chopped glass.
Like you saying chopped glass, and that is such a wonderful outcome, one of many that we experience when we're moving our bodies and we're using our muscles.
And moving through the environment. Moving through the environment and having a relationship with it where, I think that's a really great connection, because I do remember when I settled into the rhythm of the run that I noticed my feet and my breath, and then the flowers, that grew, like the different kinds of birds out there, that you notice things that you wouldn't have noticed if you were, just driving along in this environment, that it seems like you just understand this place, and you kind of, you learn with your body. I think that was part of it. It was that the movement is the message, is something that I write in the book, because that's the thing that you are communicating, is that your body is doing that work of learning, and your body will not forget that, in a way that, talking about something, reading something, it's very different.
I grew up in a culture, I feel like, that really demeaned the body and elevated the power of the mind. Bonnie, I really appreciated the way you wrote about the complexity of the conversation between muscle and mind, and also the exploration of why the brain exists. Can you speak to that?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you brought this up. This is one of my favorite little stories. Okay. So I found myself talking to this neuroscientist named Daniel Wolpert about, just kind of, again, like how we evolutionarily movement and relationship between our muscles and our brains. Like, what is this hierarchy? And he said this thing that really was so unexpected. He said, the only reason we have brains is to move. And I said, what? And he said, well, let me tell you a story about the sea squirt. And he said the sea squirt, is this like little rudimentary animal that sort of swims around in the ocean in a juvenile state. And then when it finds a suitable rock or substrate to alight upon. It settles there, attaches itself, and then it liquefies its brain because it doesn't need to move anymore. It has reached a stage of life in which it is more important to eat up those calories and use them for other functions than to actually have a brain. And brains exist in service than to control our muscles. It's like when we don't need to move anymore, our brains become less important. And so it just, I just laugh so much because I loved how this neuroscientist, this brain scientist was telling me that actually brains aren't only important in that they move us. And that we don't think about things like goosebumps or our diaphragm controlling our breathing or our blood moving or babies, coming out of the uterus. It's when we think about muscles and why they're important, we think more about this. And I'm doing this like bodybuilder, like bicep curl pose, but we don't think about those other things that I just talked about. And they are so essential to life. Our muscles are always talking to the rest of our body, discovering that muscles are an endocrine tissue, right? So they're constantly sending out these signaling molecules that travel all around our body, talking to our brain, especially, and then generating these like beneficial responses there. And our muscles have their own intelligence. They're super chatty, they're like telling us when they start moving, like, this feels good, and your metabolism is ramped up, and your blood sugar is regulated, and your mood is enhanced. Your immune system is, kick-started, and it's like we're giving you that. All of this movement is giving us that overall feeling of well-being, and it's like acknowledging this unsung hero of our bodies. And that's sort of part of what I wanted to communicate with the book is this, we follow our curiosity to this unsung tissue and it rewards us, like we can give it all of this credit, and we can say that when we move and it feels good, that we're doing ourselves, our whole selves, a service. And I think that's very powerful. I think that's really profound.
It is.
Yeah.
We have a 1.5-year-old puppy, and I often delight in her totally inefficient use of energy. Like, I love that about like baby things and children. Is they're not thinking good. About A to B. They're bubbling the joy through their bodies.
Love that too.
Another example that you drew from the ocean on Muscle is about whales breaching. And I'd love for you to speak to what whales have to do with the study of muscles and the joy of movement.
I went down this whale rabbit hole, which is a funny phrase, but I did, because I kept thinking about how whales breaching is so profound, right? So like it is, and so I wanted to again investigate that a little bit, like follow my curiosity a little bit, and then discovered that really a whale breaching is probably one of the most, or the single most powerful burst maneuver in nature, right? Because you think of whales are huge, and whales are the biggest creatures on Earth, and to propel themselves out of the water into the air where they don't belong, and then to come back down, it's like, that's so expensive calorically, right? Like, why are they doing that? And so we kind of go back to Darwin, who observed like across the animal kingdom that every species seems to jump for joy, right? That like we think about kids, and he called it like we're given to various purposeless movements. I quote this because it's just such a funny phrase, because it's sort of like you're doing it. What is the purpose of it? Because it's not for any other reason other than it feels good and it's joyful. So like kids, your puppy romping, the horses frisking, and then I was like whales breaching. And so I also, one of my favorite things was to discover that the whale butt muscle is called the peduncle. And it's just like, it's basically like it's the big muscle at the root of like where the fins attach, and it's basically what propels the whale out of the water. And I just thought, okay, I spent a couple of days, I think, writing these few pages about whale breaches and the peduncle, and I thought, is this even gonna what is this gonna go in the book? Like, how is this fitting? And then I figured it out.
Yes,
so I can bring this knowledge to you that the whale peduncle is the whale butt muscle, and that they breach because all these scientists are just like, every paper you read is sort of like, why do whales breach? I mean, it's so, they're speculating that, oh, it's to kind of boost myoglobin or to help their young kind of learn how to dive and all this stuff. And also that it seems really fun. Like they do it repeatedly. And you see that, you understand that. And when you see an animal jumping, it's sort of like this cross species communication of like, they're having fun. It's
Yeah,
great. It's joy. And
that's
that's
so
like, I
great.
actually do think that's a language.
Yeah,
You see your puppy doing that and you're just
yeah.
like, oh, what is, this is clear to me, right?
I have a new line that I'm going to shout when I see our humpbacks breaching here because they're all migrating past our house now. I will be shouting, yes, use your peduncle, humpback, use your peduncle. I've always thought that they do that, and I love that there's so much conjecture. I love that there's heaps of wiggle room with the why of whales breaching, and I've always just thought it's because they are the biggest creature moving through a weightless realm, and
Yes.
it's kind of ironic, they have the hugest, strongest form, but they're in this weightless realm, and so for them to feel the immensity, the strength of their form, they leap into the world of gravity and then come crashing down and feel the
Yes.
thinness of the air instead of the thickness of the water, and then boom, they land in the same way that we who live in this thin, airy world right here love to go in the water and feel weightless, and they're just
Dave,
flipping
you
it.
just brought this full circle. I love that. Ooh, I got goosebumps from that too.
But it's just great. It's just so fantastic, and it's such a treat to chat with you, Bonnie, because I feel like we could just go in 1,000 directions
Oh,
here, and we're all
same.
so lit up about this. Lauren has a long list of many, 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 many questions, and I'm usually just the conversational one. So I'm going to stop, and you can launch in because I
Not
can
at
see
all.
her going.
No.
Oh, I've at question 41. I want to get to this one too.
I think you just need to come. We need to body surf. We need to watch some whales
Oh.
using their
Peduncles,
peduncles
yes.
together.
Using their peduncles while we use our gluteus
That's
maximus.
not the same ring. You should, yeah, you
I
should
know
make
it's not. Peduncle
yeah,
is
no.
way better. I think I'll just refer to my butt as my peduncle.
Yeah,
Yeah, I prefer it. Before we part, Bonnie, I wanted to ask you something. You said you didn't want to write a prescriptive book, but I want to ask you about sarcopenia, which is age-related muscle loss, which starts in our 30s. You write about that in
Yes,
On Muscle.
very
Can you talk
sad.
us through? I know.
True.
Can you talk us through the science behind that and what we can all do about it?
Yeah. So most people know about, bone loss, right, as you get older. And so osteopenia is that term, but also osteoporosis is when it gets to the point when your bones are so fragile that they can break so easily if you fall. And so sarcopenia is the corresponding muscle loss with age. And that happens to everyone, no matter how active you are, no matter, how, if with your, whether you're not a professional athlete or just, mostly sedentary or recreational, it's normal. And so the idea, again, from, I think just science and the health messaging these days has come together because this critical mass of scholarship has gathered behind the importance of this strength training, resistance training, maintaining your muscle mass and strength into your later years, so that not only are you physically capable of doing the things that you want to do, but to support your cognitive health. I mean, that's very clear that muscle strength and mass as you get older correlates with brain health. And again, it's because of this constant conversation that's going on between our muscles and our brain and the rest of our body systems. And so the idea that, again, like weight training or some kind of resistance training in which you are like bearing your weight, being active, physically doing things, again, that bring you joy, and then doing something that feels hard, like physically, is really good for you, for your body, and for your health going forward and aging well. And so
Can,
I think that's really the message that I want to send with this book.
can you speak to the particular relationship between grip strength and overall health and well-being? I think it's so interesting.
It is. Grip strength is funny because it's just like a proxy. It's like one really good measure of how you're doing, because like, again, the muscles, your grip strength is like how strong your muscles are in your hand and your forearm and all that. It's just one really good indicator that correlates with overall health, like the muscles in your hand. And it seems funny, but it is like all of the science, like that and it just is like, basically it's like how active you are in your life and what are you using your hands for, and sort of like, and also there's another test called the sit to stand test, which is sort of like how many times you can stand up and sit down from a chair without using your hands, like, because that's core strength, that's balance, that's all these little things that we don't really think about as like big things, are like, because they are all reflecting your overall health. And so as I was moving my hands just now, I was thinking holding onto that surfboard really helps my grip strength, trying to keep it from getting ripped out of my hands,
Yeah.
in a set. It's like a full body workout. I feel pretty good about that, as long as I don't get like whacked in the face with it. It's really not something I don't want people to be scared of their muscles. And it's almost like it's a reminder of like that you do have a relationship with your muscles, and maybe you have been like frenemies for a while or something, like you're not like, it's like a distant relative that you haven't been in touch with for a while, but like maybe you can like work on repairing that relationship with your muscles and like finding joy in movement. And what is a thing that you really like doing with your body, first of all? That's thing one, if you haven't really been doing much. And then like thing two is like throwing in some stuff that feels, difficult and from a strength and resistance kind of way is good. And that could be, I mean, you are both outdoors and running around all the time. It's like a lot of functional stuff that you're doing is already resistance training, lifting things, lifting a dog or a child. It's also very good. A squirming human is always like, throws a variable into it. Like, I know that's, something that you are both dealing with right now in the most wonderful ways. So, so I think that it's not something to be scared of. It's something to actually embrace, and get a good hug on.
Yeah.
I'm on the doorstep of 40. I'm probably going to say this in every episode this season. But
Own it, girl.
Yeah. I've been so surprised to still feel like my best surfing is ahead of me, and that I feel stronger in my body and myself than I ever have. You're, like you said, a little further along the path. What surprised you about aging and your relationship with your body? I read recently that you wrote about only feeling like a real surfer in the last few years.
Yeah. And because, as you know, like the arc of surfing is such that you have to have put in so much time into just becoming like a proficient individual in the water, like with all of those variables and the knowledge that, Dave, you were talking about earlier, is like, do you know where you're supposed to be? Do you know how to read the conditions? Do you know what is happening with the winds? Well, and it's not like academic knowledge either, but it is when you learn it, right? It's like intellectual. You're like, oh my God, it's so much information. But it's to actually incorporate that into how your body is moving, that's the time variable, right? That's where you actually feel all of these conditions with your body, not with your mind. And I think that's a little bit of what you were kind of flicking at earlier, where you can do all of these things, you can prepare all you want, but when you're actually in the ocean, are you reading everything in a way that feels holistic, that you're doing it all at the same time, and it's not like taking up so much of your mental energy that you're not responding physically and flowing with that water, because you can't be thinking consciously about all of those things that we talk about when we're surfing that we need to know, because then you're not surfing, right? And so it has taken me this long, or has taken me up until the last few years, to get to the point where I can do that. And that feels great. That feels amazing, that I can be out there and not constantly checking myself in terms of like what I need to be doing. It's just that I know what I need to be doing and I don't have to think about it. And that's the body knowledge. That's this, where I have gotten myself to that place physically and mentally, where I can hold all the variables at once and have that proprioceptive understanding of where the wave is coming from, where I have to be to meet it. And then when we do meet, that I can take that energy and go in the direction I want to go and do the things I want to do. And that's amazing. That's the magic. I will keep chasing that joy and wonder.
Time is precious. Thanks for spending some of yours listening with us today. Our editor this season is the multi-talented Ben Jake Alexander. The soundtrack was composed by Shannon Soul Carroll, with additional tunes by Dave and Ben. We'll be continuing today's conversation on Instagram, where we're at Water People Podcast. And you can subscribe to our very infrequent newsletter to get book recommendations, questions we're pondering, behind-the-scenes glimpses into recording the podcast, and more via our website, waterpeoplepodcast.com.